Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Yura and welcome one and all to the first deck profile of the month of Meadowlands. Today we're covering the Machina Geargia and Machina Gadget decks at the same time because I'm gonna be so for real, they're kind of the same thing. They've got different upsides and downsides, but the core of the deck is still relatively the same and the game plan is pretty similar. So we're gonna start with the deck that I am personally a little more familiar with, Machina Geargia. I actually had an opportunity to play in a Discord tournament for Meadowlands fairly recently, and I ended up placing second out of that entire event with a very similar list to what you see on your screen. Now, I'm going to be totally real. I'm not the best at this deck. I still have a lot to learn about when to push the advantage and when to keep things to yourself and like keep things, you know, mostly in your hand and play things slow. But all that said, I do still really like this deck. A lot of the power is kind of stuck within the Machina cards, of which there are 2, potentially 3 playable ones. If you're counting Cannon, which I kind of don't, but like also it's fine. Machina Fortress and Machina Gear Frame are phenomenal pieces of this deck. And they're kind of the main reasons why I think machines even have a leg to stand on at all. The Geargias on their own are like fine, but the real power is kind of concentrated in Machina Fortress. Fortress is a phenomenal card. It is one of the strongest single cards in the format. It has 2 layers of like, oh, please don't out me because you'll get hurt for it. But also it's a relatively repeatable boss monster that is pretty weird to out. Specifically, Fortress can summon itself from either the hand or graveyard by pitching machines from your hand whose total levels equal 8 or more. This can include itself if it is in your hand, so you can pitch both Fortress and literally any other machine to get above 8. And then once it goes to the graveyard, you can summon it out of the graveyard. And then you have a 2500 guy that either, when it's destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, can target a card your opponent controls and blow it up. Or if it's targeted by opponent's monster effect, can look at your opponent's hand and discard a card from it. Really phenomenal card, really weird to out, and just generally really good for putting the pressure on. The main way that you're going to find this card is through Machina Gear Frame, who on normal summon can add any Machina monster from your deck to your hand except itself. This is kind of the main reason why people will sometimes run Cannon as well, because Cannon is a level 8 machine that can be used as one material for Fortress's summon and effect. And that is all on its own perfectly fine. You could also in theory run Force for the same reason, but Force is quite literally just a brick that sits in your hand, while Cannon can actually technically summon itself, although it doesn't really do a whole lot. I'm choosing not to run them because I don't really like the bricks personally, but it's totally fine if you want to run them. I do not see a reason of like it being super bad. Although if you are going to run one, I would suggest Cannon over Force because Force is nothing. Force is a nothing card. This card does nothing. Anyway, on to the actual Geargias, the thing that makes this Machina Geargia. We don't actually have a whole lot of them available in Meadowlands. We've got Arsenal Accelerator Armor Mark II and the basic Geargiano alongside the Geargigant X because we are pre-structure deck. So this means that the Geargias are a little on the weaker side, but I do think they still contribute enough to warrant even considering this variant at all. Arsenal is the first one that we're going to talk about, and it gains 200 attack for each Geargia monster you control, including itself, which means on its own it is a 1700 attack monster, and can hit some okay numbers off of like just having 1 or 2 accelerators on the board. I think getting up to 2100. And that is like fine. That lets you punch over the Fire Fist names pretty easily, and it can contest a lot of like the vanillas that are summoned off of Rescue Rabbit for decks like that. But Arsenal's real power, I think, comes in the fact that you contribute this card to summon any other Geargia monster from your deck, which is pretty nice. This is how you're going to really get access to your accelerators and armors, which are both the main ways that you have of getting your advantage loop online. Accelerator specifically being able to summon itself from hand to get an additional material on the board, and when it's set from the field to the graveyard, you can target a Geargia monster except Accelerator in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. The main downside with Accelerator is that this does not trigger when it is used as Xyz material for any of your machine guys. So while you might be wanting to make Geargigant X with this card, you won't get that additional add back from graveyard if you actually do use it like this, because it has to specifically go from field to graveyard as opposed to, to graveyard generally, which I understand from a balancing point of view, but in terms of making it function with its own archetype, I don't really like it that much. Armor is the third card and is, I'm very torn on it. So Armor is functionally a flip monster. It has the effect that lets it flip itself face down, and when it is flipped face up by any means, you can add a Geargia monster from your deck to your hand except itself. This is the other part of your resource loop, and it's like fine, but the problem is this card loses to a lot. Namely, it will lose to like Dark World or the Mermails pitching the Atlanteans that pop face down. It's like anything that removes the armor before it flips face up is really, really detrimental to this deck and is typically enough to just kind of stop it in its tracks. That said, if armor is allowed to resolve like once or twice, you are in a phenomenal position to kind of win the game. So I'm very torn on it. It's both a really, really good card and the most miserable card in the deck all at the same time. All of these machine monsters are kind of, you know, helped by the fact that we have Tin Goldfish now. Tin Goldfish on normal summon lets you special summon any level 4 monster from your hand. This is Arsenal, Accelerator, Armor, Gear Frame, and while Gear Frame doesn't get its effect here, and Armor doesn't really work as good Exceed material because it wants to go face down, it's also just like fine because anything you'll get off the Armor search can be gotten off of the Gear Gigant X that you would make with Tin Goldfish plus any level 4 machine. Gear Gigant X is kind of the glue that holds everything together. It is one of the strongest cards in the entire deck, being able to search out functionally any monster in your main deck that is not exactly Effect Veiler or Fortress, and that is phenomenal. That is so nice. It's going to be one of your main ways of getting access to Fortress that you don't already have, because you can go get Gear Frame and then normal summon the Gear Frame next turn in order to make the Fortress online. It's phenomenal. I love this card so much. Additionally, Gear Gigant X does have a second effect that can, in theory, come up in this deck because we are playing a single level 3 Geargiano monster, which won't trigger when it's special summoned back by Gear Gigant X because this card is only on normal or flip, but like it's fine, I guess. At the very least, it provides another body on board for like chump blocking, which is fine enough in this format. Mark II specifically is a decent way of getting your guys out of the graveyard alongside Iron Call, but because it's level 3, it can't really make an Xyz play, which is why we're only really running the 1. It's fine in a late game scenario when you like are just trying to get your resource loop back online. So you can go Mark II to get an armor back, or you can go Mark II to get an accelerator to get something back to your hand, and then go from there. It's really solid and simplified game states, but finding it early feels very bad. We're also on 3 copies of Effect Veiler because it is just like a fine hand trap to be playing the neutral game with. Double copies of Instant Fusion. A lot of the times you'll be seeing this card in a lot of my decks at like 3 because it is just a phenomenal extender. But unfortunately, we don't really have access to a level 4 machine target for this. And the main Xyz monster that you want to be making with this deck is a, you know, type restricted Xyz. So this card actually does kind of lose value. And instead, we're supplementing that 3rd copy of Instant Fusion with 3 copies of Iron Call, because this does actually get you your additional machine monster to get a Gear Gigant X on board. The only downside with Iron Call is it negates the effects of any level 4 or lower machine that it summons, but all in all, card is really nice. It also has a very funny interaction with Accelerator, because if you use Iron Call, summon back the Accelerator, and then do plays that do not involve that Accelerator, the Accelerator in the end phase will then blow up and get its add back from grave effect because it left the field, which is pretty fine. I do like that quite a lot. We're also on the general staple pool of 1 Heavy, 1 Dark Hole, 1 Reborn, 3 MST, and of course a limiter removal, which I'm going to be so for real with y'all. In all of the games that I played in that Discord tournament that I played in, I did not see this card a single time. It was functionally like I wasn't playing it because I never saw it at all. But overall, it's a great card. It's a really easy way of going for game pushes. It turns Fortress plus any guy into lethal, I'm pretty sure. I might be wrong about that because, yeah, Goldfish doesn't do it, but like anything with a somewhat relevant attack stat, like Arsenal is fantastic for this, or Gear Frame is phenomenal for this as well, or really any of your machine Xyz monsters like Gear Gigant X turn into a very solid game push. We're also on a decent lineup of traps. I'm not fully sold on the torrential tributes here. In theory, they work pretty nicely because you can get the advantage back off the accelerator that goes to the graveyard, and you can equip the gear frame to anything that you don't want to die to proc it. So you can just like save a fortress from your torrential tribute, which is pretty nice. But I'm still kind of testing around with it. We're also on double bottomless because it beats Fire Fist, and the double solemn sweep because if you're not on them, I don't know what you're doing. These cards are phenomenal, and you should always be playing one of each. The extra deck is pretty straightforward. It's mostly a rank 4 toolbox in this version of the deck, and honestly the same in the other version of the deck as well, that we're going to touch on very shortly. We're on 2 copies of the Darkfire Dragon. This could also be Carbonala Warriors. If you really wanted to play any Earth specific rank 4s, I think the main one is Fairy King Albert Dick, I guess. This guy requires 2 level 4 Earth monsters, and it technically outs Abyss Gaios exactly, but it requires you to trade 2 level 4 Earth monsters for it, which could also just be like your Geargia loop, and also it requires you to crash into the Gaios. But it does out the guy, or at the very least, it requires your opponent to actually negate it, and then you can go do something else from there. Technically, if you want to play this card, you can just swap these out for the Carbonala Warriors. Darkfire Dragon is doing functionally nothing unique here. It is literally just a level 4 target. There's kind of no explicit reason why I'm running it over the other 4 target. It just, I don't know, it's the guy I like. Onto the actual rank 4 toolbox though, we've got 1 Ouroboros because we can put 3 level 4 bodies on board, and it's like fine removal with a decent attack stat. 1 Gem Knight Pearl because it's the biggest rank 4 2-mat guy. 1 Violent Die Sigma for some unique removal because I love this card so much. 1 Utopia because I wasn't on this initially and I found myself really missing it. The Attack Negate can actually be really clutch in certain instances. 1 Shockmaster because again we can field 3 level 4s really easily. Double Geargia X because it's the best card in the extra deck and gets your access to your entire engine. 1 Papilloperative. Funny enough, you can use this to trigger an armor early, like if you flip it face down and then Papilloperative it up. It does work like that, although your guy will go pretty heavily down in attacks. You do need to get it off the board afterwards. 1 Black Ship of Corn because it outs Maestroke. 1 Maestroke because it's the best defensive card in the format. 1 the Volval Chain to either stack or dump anything relevant. A big card for this is Machina Fortress. 1 Dweller to beat the graveyard decks, and a Gagaga Cowboy to out any problematic cards like Ophion, which Maestroke also helps us with. The sideboard is pretty heavily slotted into for Dark World, Infernity, and Mermail, but I think a lot of this could, in theory, change to deal with some decks that are more comfortable playing lower to the ground. I think Shadow Imprisoning Mirror here is actually pretty not doing anything. Like, it is, in theory, another check card for the Infernity and Dark World matchups, but I think we could maybe do something a little bit better here. So I'm still not fully sure on this. Definitely some stuff that I want to mess around with, but we're on 3 copies of the Bug for any combo decks, 1 copy of Weisel and 1 copy of Grinnell for 2 different use cases. Weisel is good into Spellbook in theory because it is a spell negate, and Grinnell is good for matchups where you really have to go aggro into things like Dino Rabbit or Fire Fist that are just trying to play the lower neutral game, and Grinnell just gets very, very big. They're also both very good into synchro decks because obviously they can just yoink whatever synchro monster your opponent is trying to sit on, although there aren't really a whole lot of those around. 1 Minecon for going second because it's a phenomenal card. Triple Lightning Vortex is a card that I actually really like in this deck because if you pitch like Fortress, you can just summon the Fortress back anyway. But a more obvious use case for this is like pitching something for Accelerator and then summoning out the Accelerator to get that thing back, like an armor or something. Or you can pitch something for Georgiana Mark II to summon back. We're also on Triple Different Dimension Ground. I actually like this card a lot, especially in a deck where you really care about your own monsters going to the graveyard, but you don't want your opponent's monsters going there. DDG, in theory, outs a lot of things like Dark World and Infernity and Mermail as well, although not really because Mermail doesn't really care about that guys being banished because the Atlanteans will still trigger, but it just hampers them a little bit, but like not really. So I'm not fully sold on this. I think this is still a fine card, but this Shadow Imprisoning Mirror should probably be something that is more targeted for Mermail. That's it for the Geargia stuff. Let's hop over and talk about the gadgets. So there's a couple of key differences in this variant of the deck over the Geargia one. Notably, you'll realize already we're on less monsters, and we've replaced all the Geargia stuff with gadgets instead. I'm not fully sold on these counts for the gadgets. Currently, we're just on 2 copies of each one of them because on normal or special summon, they just get a different one of themselves, which is fine. The problem is if you open too many of these in one hand, they don't really do a whole lot. And this deck, more so than the Geargias, is much more heavily focused on making Geargigan X to get this conga line of gadgets going more frequently, which is why we're not on any copies of Instant Fusion, and we're instead supplementing this deck with some more trap cards. The big one that is different between this deck and the Geargia deck is Ultimate Offering, because this is functionally nigh infinite material. Ultimate Offering can turn any one gadget into an infinite string of gadgets, so you can go through all 6 of them, which is unbelievable. This lets you make some very powerful Xyz monsters like Shockmaster with relative ease, but you can also make like a Thunder Spark Dragon, which is fine for board wiping, but a lot of the time it's just going to be for like getting a bunch of bodies on board and then going for a big OTK. The general game plan of both of these decks is relatively simple. You're trying to play low to the ground, get your resource loop going through either way, and then from there, use that resource loop to just slowly burn your opponents out of the game. This is a lot more relevant in this version of the deck than the Geargia one, because in the Geargia case, you do tend to run out of gas if you like armor gets stopped or your accelerator isn't adding things back. And you'll notice that your fortress is eating through your monsters much faster than you can provide them. This isn't really present in the gadget variant of the deck just because of how much advantage the gadgets provide innately, where the Geargias kind of require more specific scenarios to provide that advantage. And that's kind of the reason why I think the gadgets are a little more well positioned in this format, because even though they're not going to be proccing off the Iron Call, they don't really need to. They work significantly better alongside Tin Goldfish, because Goldfish plus Gadget equals a Geargigan X plus an additional guy in hand, so you can use the Geargigan X to just get another Tin Goldfish and do the same thing next turn. And it also just like makes for much easier fodder for the Fortress, just because every time you normal or special summon one of these guys except through Iron Call, you are going to be getting an additional search, and that is phenomenal for Fortress. I do think this is a deck that can also utilize that Machina cannon that we talked about earlier, just to have these gear frames be able to get a Fortress on board with 1 card. I'm just not fully sure of the cut here. I do really like this version of the deck playing more trap cards. I think there is maybe a world where the sideboard gets adjusted a little bit. You'll see that this version of the deck is on DD Crow instead of DDG. And this deck is instead playing Macrocosmos instead of DDG as well, because this deck doesn't really care about your guys going to the graveyard except for exactly Fortress cases. I think I could still probably see myself running DDG instead of Cosmos, because I can see a world in which the Fortress stuff happens and you run yourself out of resources because you're not filling your graveyard with stuff, but it's whatever. Mind Crush is in here as the Mermail answer, and I think this is something that I want to be testing around a little bit more with in the Geargia deck as well, just because of how good of an answer Mind Crush is to a lot of Mermail hands. It doesn't fully stop them, but it is significantly better than trying to like a Shadow Imprisoning Mirror or something. So these side decks are different to kind of give you a sense of where my mind is at on cards that can be used. They are not fully set side decks. These are just cards that I have in mind when I am testing with things like this. And realistically, I think a perfect side deck for either one of these probably combines cards from both of them. So we'll see going forward. But that said, that's kind of really all I have to say about these decks. Actually, one more thing before we get off the gadget stuff. You'll notice that the Mech Lords are actually in the main here, and that's because since the gadgets themselves do not provide a lot of pressure on your opponent, it is much nicer to just have monsters in here that do apply that pressure in their stead. While the Geargias themselves don't apply pressure all on their own, they do at least facilitate some things that can apply pressure a little more frequently, whereas the gadgets just kind of, replace themselves with more gadgets, and the gadgets on their own are really not that threatening. So it does help to have like a potential 4,000 attack guy in addition to a Fortress or, a wise little Steel Synchro monsters. I could generally see, I think, either one of them or both of them going to the side deck to fit in like a cannon potentially, because all in all, they are still kind of bricks, but This is a version of the deck that I think doesn't really mind blowing its own stuff up, so you could maybe even play like Needle Sealing. Honestly, you could play Needle Sealing in the other version of the deck as well, because you will be having a face down armor a lot more often than not, and blowing up your own accelerator for Needle Sealing's purposes is pretty fine as well. But I've done quite enough yapping about both of these lists, so let's see them in action. All right, we haven't been here in a while, right? Welcome to the Edo Pro replay screen. We've got a couple of games for you here, 2 best of 3s, and I think they were some pretty decent games. So we're going to start off here with the Geargia deck. We've got a pretty solid opening hand of Gear Frame, Armor, Effect Veiler, Instant Fusion, and Bottomless into our Dino Rabbit opponent, who has opened the vanilla, as always, the vanilla. Plus Forbidden Lance, an Instant Fusion of their own, Judgment, and Heavy Storm. So let's get this started. Our opponent's going to draw first, drawing a Dark Hole for turn. They're going to summon out the Sabersaurus and set both the Forbidden Lance and the Judgment. They don't really have to fear the Heavy Storm here because they do have that Judgment. We're going to snipe out that Forbidden Lance and go for the Gear Frame to get a Fortress to our hand. Fortress we're going to summon out using the Armor in hand, but they're going to Judgment that. We're going to follow up with an Instant Fusion to make a rank 4. In this case, it's going to be the Utopia to provide a little bit of protection for our board. We're going to set a Bottomless and pass it back to our opponent. They don't draw into a monster, so they're going to rip this Dark Hole, get the Utopia off the board to keep them safe, and set down a Trap Hole. But we've got the MST for that, and we're just kind of waiting for one of us to find Engine. Our opponent's going to find a Mirror Force off the top. Not quite it. We do find a Heavy Storm, but that is kind of going to, you know, stop us from having a protection for ourselves. They're going to find a Torrential Tribute off the top. We do find Geargia Mark II, which we are going to rip this Heavy to clear up their back row, summon out the Mark II, and get our Armor into rotation. So now our Advantage Loop is online, and our opponent's down to 2,400 life points. They are going to find a Guaiba here, which would be very scary if not for the fact that we do have the Effect Veiler. The Guaiba is going to kill our Geargia Mark II, and then not get its effect because it is negated. They're going to go Instant Fusion to summon out a Maestro to protect themselves, and pass it back to us. We do find another Veiler. Here comes the Armor effect. Armor is going to add Accelerator. Accelerator summoned into Geargia X. Geargia X is going to search out the Gear Frame, and because we didn't use our normal summon, we can use the Gear Frame here, and then protect the Geargia X with the Gear Frame and pass back to our opponent. Our opponent's going to draw into Instant Fusion, which doesn't really do much. We're going to use this Effect Filler to prevent the Maestro from flipping our Geargia X face down, so we can get an additional search out of it right here. We're going to summon out the Fortress, and then go get another Gear Frame, get the Fortress to hand, summon out this extra Gear Frame that was in the back row, make a second Geargia X, get another add to hand, summon out another Fortress, which can now clear the Maestro and then get in for lethal with the Gear Gigant X. This deck, once you get the resource loop going, feels really damn good. It's very solid and simplified board states. All right, we're into game 2, and we both open Dark Hole, which is pretty scary. Our opponent has 2 vanillas in hand this time, but at the very least, neither of us are really lacking in monsters. They do have a very scary ad here in Thunder King Ryo, which is a very, very detrimental card for our strategy. It turns off both of our Gear Frames and our Armors and our Gear Gigant X's, so it's generally pretty not favorable for us. They also have a Tour Guide from the Underworld, which is going to get them a little bit of protection in the form of Zen Main. So let's see how this plays out. Our opponent's going to go first. They're going to find off the top a Duality. They're going to rip that Duality, go find Mirror Force, Heavy Storm, or Compulse. They're going to grab the Compulse, and spoiler alert, I'm going to misplay into that Compulse. They're going to summon out this Ryo, which is pretty damn good, so we're going to clear that with our Dark Hole and then go for Gear Frame here. Gear Frame's going to get the Fortress. Fortress are going to send the Arsenal and itself to summon itself. We're going to attack with both in, and then I'm going to do the dumbest thing of all time and to play immediately into a Compulse, wiping our board and a lacking Gear Frame now. They're going to go Tour Guide because they don't really have much else to do here. They're going to get a Night Assailant and go into Zen Mains. Zen Mains is a phenomenal defensive card. It kind of makes outing it very weird, and they also have a Bottomless Trap Hole to back it up. We're going to go Gear Frame here. Gear Frame's going to get a second Fortress. Fortress is going to summon itself out and eat that Bottomless. We're then going to go the second Fortress, and I am going to make a play that is a little weird. So my thought process there was, and I'm going to kind of pause here, but my thought process here was, if I can bait my opponent into attacking into my Zen Mains, or attacking Zen Mains into Fortress, and then I can keep it protected by forcing them to either hit the Fortress, and which will give them a discard, and also the Gear Frame will protect it, but also I can stop the Zen Mains from protecting itself by just Veilering it. So that was my thought process, why I did that, but I mean, they drew Minecon off the top, so, you know, who knows. Probably wouldn't have played out how I wanted it to. We're going to get the Fortress back and draw for a turn in Instant Fusion. We're going to get this Gear Frame back up and go Instant Fusion. Here's Darkfire Dragon. We're going to make a Black Ship of Corn that is a very, very clean out to that Zen mains. We're going to go combat, swinging for 600, but this Black Ship of Corn cannot attack. They're going to draw a bottomless off for top, and they are just going to have a very, very clean Dark Hole. Swinging for 19 with the Sabersaurus, set of bottomless, and that is probably lethal from here. We do have a Geargia Arsenal, which we're going to try to summon out, but it is going to get bottomless, and that is just one more battle phase to lethal. All right. Game 3 time. All right, folks, it all comes down to this, and we have opened not great. It's really not great here. 10 goldfish, no target. Decent back row and torrential tribute, but our opponent has 2 vanillas and 3 really, really strong trap cards. So we're going to see if this MST and Instant Fusion is enough to get us anywhere, but it's not looking great. We're going to find another torrential tribute off the top. We're going to normal summon out the 10 goldfish and go for Instant Fusion, just to make a Maestroke and keep ourselves kind of protected. We do have this Torrential plus Maestroke play, which is not terrible. They're going to go for Sabersaurus plus Instant Fusion into a Maestroke of their own. We are going to Torrential Tribute here and pitching the Effect Veiler to make it so that their Maestroke will not survive that Torrential. They're going to set 2. We're going to MST one of their back row, and they're going to be left with only a Torrential left. We're going to rip another MST off the top, get rid of that Torrential, swing in for 18, and set our Torrential of our own. A lot of Torrentials this game. They do find a Monster Reborn off the top, which is very, very bad for us. They're going to normal summon out Cabazals, try to go for a Dolka. Thankfully, we do have that other Torrential Tribute. We are going to swing in for 18 with this Maestroke into a Mirror Force that our opponent chooses not to use. They do find arguably the best top deck off the top here in Rescue Rabbit. They're going to make an Evil Zorlagia, which is going to be extremely, extremely difficult for us to out. We do find an Iron Call here, which is pretty solid. We're going to flip up this Geargia armor, get an Accelerator summon, and then we're going to summon up this 10 Goldfish, make a Geargia X, which is going to be eaten by the Logia. But that Logia is now out of the way. So long as they fade the Straw Step, which they didn't, we are really in danger here. We're going to get that armor effect off. We do get into another armor, and we do have Accelerator here. Unfortunately, that Judgment is going to keep us off of any additional rank 4 plays. They do find a Torrential Tribute here. They're just drawing to like every single good piece of back row that they could possibly get. We do find limiter removal for the first time in any of these games that I've ever played. We go damage, and unfortunately walk right into that Mirror Force. We do get to get our armor back, but we are very, very low on life points, and we really do not have a clean way of outing this Logia, even though it doesn't have any of its materials left. We do find an MST off the top, which is pretty nice. We are going to rip that and set this armor. Unfortunately, armor plus limiter removal is not quite enough. They're going to go Pot of Duality, which does find the monsters, and that is cleanly enough to get them over our board and in for lethal. All right, in with the second best of 3, and while Geargia kept it close with Dino Rabbit, this is a much more uphill battle for the Gadgets. We've got them paired against Spellbook today, and this opening hand looks really, really bad. Maybe the worst hand I've ever seen this deck produce. Double Veiler, Mirror Force, Bottomless Trapple, and Iron Call. Multiple of these cards really not doing much. Our opponent has double Blue Boy, 1 High Priestess of Prophecy, a Master, and a Reborn. So let's see how this plays out. Our opponent's going first. They're going to find Grand Spellbook Tower off the top, which is phenomenal. Thankfully, we have this Veiler for the Blue Boy, which does actually pretty cleanly cut them off of any plays for this turn because they don't have any way of getting the High Priestess onto field because they only have 2 Spellbook names in hand. We're going to just kind of chill here. We're going to set the Mirror Force and the Bottomless Trapple and pass it back to our opponent. They're going to lead another Blue Boy. Thankfully, we do have this second Veiler, 2 Blue Boys for 2 Veilers. They're going to overlay into a Gachi Gantetsu to kind of stave off something. We do have Gear Frame. Gear Frame is going to add Fortress. Fortress summoned by getting rid of this 10 Goldfish. Iron Call back to 10 Goldfish, make a Geargia X. And this is a really, really great play from us here. We do have Weisel now, so we can ideally cut them off of anything really bad, but we don't really have a way of summoning the Weisel ourselves. They are going to go High Priestess of Prophecy. We do have a Bottomless for that, but they do have a second High Priestess in hand. High Priestess is going to pop our back row, which does play cleanly around our Weisel because Weisel only summons if you pop a monster. They're going to go Eternity to get back the Grand Spellbook Tower, get the Resource Loop online, and then just go combat and gear over our Geargia X. We find a Torrential Tribute, which is a really solid way of proccing this Weisel in hand, but I don't know if it's going to be enough. Grand Spellbook Tower is going to activate, shuffling back, and then getting a Justice of Prophecy off the top. They're going to go High Priestess of Prophecy, banishing another card to get rid of our mystical or our torrential tribute. We're going to MST the Grand Spellbook Tower, which is going to get them an effect veiler because they only have one target in graveyard. And then we're going to swing over that effect veiler to keep them off of any synchro plays. Our opponent's going to draw into Veiler of their own. They're going to go the High Priestess of Prophecy to pop our guy. And down comes the Wiseau because they do have to bait it out eventually. They're going to Synchro Summon into a Scrap Dragon. Very funny, a Synchro monster beating over a Mech Lord, but it is what it is. We draw into a very dead Grenell, and they're going to just kind of summon out the Justice of Prophecy, Eternity back the Grand Spellbook Tower, so the resource loop is back online, swinging for 28 and 16, and then in the end phase, they're going to activate Justice of Prophecy because they activated a Spellbook card to get both High Priestess and Spellbook of Secrets to get their game plan online. We found a green Gadget. Green Gadget is going to add a red Gadget, and then we're going to pass it back to our opponent. We're not dead immediately here, but this Grand Spellbook Tower, shuffling back the Eternity to get a Fate in hand, is pretty much well over lethal. They're going to Master for the Secrets. Secrets get Power. Power is going to buff up these High Priestess, and they're going to swing in to get an additional Surge just for good measure, and then kill us with the Scrap Dragon. All right, rough game one for the Gadget boys. Game two's not looking a whole lot better with triple MST, a Mind Crush that we've sided in, and a Wiseau that is, not active. The more I play with these Mech Lords, the more I go, they should probably be in the sideboard because we really don't need them here. That said, let's see how this plays out. Our opponent also is kind of lacking a starter, so maybe there's going to be a little bit of time here to make this happen. We do find off the top a red Gadget, which is honestly pretty much all we could ever ask for. We're going to set both the Mind Crush and the MST, and our opponent's going to rip an MST of their own. They're going to MST and MST. They're going to set down an Effect Veiler to kind of chump block a little bit. We're going to draw into Gear Frame, which is probably the best draw in our deck, but they do have the Effect Veiler. Thankfully, we do still have 2 level 4 machines on board, so we can go into Geargia X and get a Tin Goldfish. This Goldfish going to be used to get the yellow Gadget online. Our opponent does find Dark Hole to keep us off an additional search with the Geargia X, but that is going to proc our Wiseau summon. Suddenly not feeling as bad about having it in the opener. We're going to pass it back to us. Gear Frame comes down. Sorry, my brain got scrambled there. We're going to summon out the Fortress by ditching the Tin Goldfish because that is just a better play to do than going Tin Goldfish for the yellow Gadget. We're going to protect the Wiseau with the Gear Frame here, and they are going to attempt to summon the High Priestess of Prophecy, where we are going to flip up the Mind Crush. We're going to Mind Crush out this Spellbook of Secrets, but High Priestess can still banish from hand or graveyard to get a pop going, so they're going to pop the Gear Frame and then activate Spellbook Star Hall. That Mind Crush, I probably hit the wrong target. It was maybe better for me to just like hit the High Priestess while it was still in hand, but I'm not super used to playing Mind Crush into Spellbook, so that is maybe just a misplay on me. We are going to negate this with the Wiseau. They're going to go Eternity to get back these Secrets, activate the Secrets because they have not used it this turn. Get to a Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, get Fate. Fate is going to activate to banish a card we control. They're going to banish out this Machina Fortress, crash into the Wiseau, and then swing in for 500. Over to us, we're going to normal summon out this yellow Gadget. This is kind of where that infinite conga line of assholes comes into play. We're going to set down this second MST and crash over their Spellbook Magician of Prophecy, and they are really lacking on resources here. They've got a Master in hand, but that Master isn't really currently doing anything. We're going to go get Green Gadget, add Red Gadget, and then go Pot of Avarice, shuffling back a bunch of our materials into the deck. Materials monsters, making Geargia X. I probably should have attacked first there, but it's whatever. And now we're going to add back the Wiseau that we shuffled back, so we have even more protection. Unfortunately, they don't have a Spellcaster on board, so this Master is just dead, and we are very cleanly here able to wrap this game up. All right, 1-1, and these are probably 2 of the best hands these decks have produced this entire set. Both of us, once again, opening up Dark Hole because, God, it's just glued to our hands. We have opened Solemn Judgment, and they have opened Fate, so we do still have interaction on both sides. Let's see how this plays out. They're going to start off with normal summoning a Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. We can't stop that. They're going to go Secrets. Secrets get, let's think of a Star Hall. Star Hall is going to activate. They're going to go Master. Master copy Secrets. They're going to get Fate. Or no, Power. Sorry, my brain is not functioning. They're going to use Power to get an additional counter on the Star Hall and also get the 3 requisite spells in the grave to make this Spellbook of Fate online. We're going to draw into a Bottomless Trap Hole. We're going to Dark Hall away that Spellbook Magician of Prophecy to turn off the Fate. We're going to go Gear Frame to get the Fortress and then set the field. We're also going to MST in end phase to get rid of that fate. We probably could have just done that first instead of wasting the dark hole, but it's totally fine. They're going to activate another Spellbook Star Hole, but unfortunately no monsters here. We are just going to swing in with a gear frame because they don't have a way of defending themselves currently. Here's a Justice, though. They're going to use the Grand Spellbook Tower to get another draw, and that's going to be a Secrets, which is a phenomenal add for them. This sequence of plays that just happened here, they're going to normal summon Justice of Prophecy. We are going to Bottomless. They're going to attempt to Wisdom to make it unaffected by trap cards, and we are going to flip Judgment to prevent that from happening so we can still remove the Justice, and then they will not get their Search in the end phase. They're going to go Secrets. Secrets are going to add Blue Boy. Unfortunately, they don't have another normal summon this turn, but they do have this Dark Hole. And we are kind of left with nothing until we draw into this Tin Goldfish. This Goldfish is going to normal summon, not summon anything from hand, but it does let us Iron Call out this Gear Frame, go get Gear Gain X, and then grab anything to swing in and limit removal for lethal. Finally got a win with it. All right, so how do I feel about these decks? Honestly, I've kind of just realized that, like, there definitely needs to be some more coherent deck building things happening here. I say that in the sense that, like, in this version of the deck, the Mech Lords are on the side, which I think is correct. And then in this version of the deck, they're in the main, which I think is probably incorrect. I might also take another look at the Xyz toolbox in this version of the deck because it's not on, like, Ouroboros. And we're missing a couple of cards like Papilloperative, but I'm not fully sure. I think there is definitely a world where this version of the deck, the Gadget version of the deck, does actually take off because these gadgets, just being able to, like, add multiple materials to their hand over the course of a game is very nice for your general hand advantage. And it helps really significantly for keeping up with the grind game decks like Spellbook. I've really enjoyed that best of 3 against Spellbook. This deck really felt like it was keeping pace with it, even though sometimes there were multiple turns of just bricking. But, you know, sometimes if you get cut off your resource loops, that just happens. I overall really adore these two decks. I think I'm personally going to be experimenting a little bit more with the Gadget variant going forward because, oh, don't look at that. I do think the Geargia variant is, I'm not saying it's hitting its ceiling, but I'm kind of at a loss with where to go with it from here. I think you could totally add in the Machina Cannon. I think that's totally fine. But apart from adding in just like some other trap cards, like I think a Needle Ceiling is actually really not terrible here just because you are trying to play around like a set monster and you don't mind your accelerators going to the graveyard. I brought it up in the initial deck profile and I really don't mind it. It's definitely something that I want to experiment with. But it's definitely something that I would not see in the Machina Gadget version of the deck. That said, Mind Crush, goated. I need to play around with it more because I'm super not used to it, but I really do love these two decks, and I cannot wait to keep experimenting with them. But with all that said, I want to thank you all so much for sticking around to the end of the video. It really does mean the world to me, and I hope you all continue to enjoy the month of Meadowlands as we bring more and more things to you. With all that said, though, I'm gonna hop out of here, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye-bye!